but yeah, welcome along. My name is Mark Ferguson, Next Gen Agri. Today's webinar is brought to you as part of a project we've got with Meat and Livestock Australia as a producer demonstration site, and it really is focusing on maidens or first lambers. I guess we're considering them as either ewe lambs or your two-tooth maidens, but predominantly focusing on those traditional maidens that are 19 months old or thereabouts at joining. Today's presentation is going to be about those and what we do know, I suppose, and we'll get through that we don't know everything, and we want to learn some stuff, and that's what hopefully you will help us today and next week. But yeah, the concept of the project is to do some trial work around some different things that we think might improve that first reproductive cycle, because there's often a big gap as we'll cover as we go through. Cool. Yeah. So as I said, for those that just joined, Meat and Livestock Australia have funded this project. This is a presentation that we're giving it to sort of, suss out some of the issues and find potential collaborators. So yeah, magnificent maidens, getting those first lambers going as well as we can. It's probably, this slide's irrelevant thanks to COVID. We all know what we're doing around Zoom these days, but yeah, if you can mute when you're not talking, by all means unmute and yell at us or ask a question. That's fine. If you don't like talking on the microphone, but you're happy to ask questions on the chat box and say good day. And so if you go up to or down to more and chat, you can enter questions or just make any comments you like. That's fine. Just want to introduce who we are, and I think Tomo's there somewhere. So you there, Tomo?
Yeah, mate. I love that photo. It must have been taken a few years ago.
We're both looking young there, mate. And he's not that serious, I promise you all. But so yeah, Dr. Andrew Thompson, or Associate Professor Andrew Thompson at Murdoch Uni. I'll let you introduce yourself, Tomo.
Yeah, good to be here. Look, Ferg and I've had I know some of you, but Ferg and I've worked together for 20 odd years. It all started with lifetime wool management, or lifetime wool, which became lifetime ewe management, which many of the Australians would be familiar with. But yeah, basically a background in sheep reproduction, a lot of work with ewe lambs as well. But what became a little bit evident, and was part of the reason for putting this program together, is the traditional maiden, as Ferg said, has been a bit of a gap, and I guess that'll become a little bit evident. So, and that's why we're keen to sort of work together over the next couple of years and learn a lot more about how we might optimise their management.
Cool, thanks, Tomo. And so for those who don't know me, Mark Ferguson, I used to work in Australia. One of my early on in my jobs out of uni was working with Tomo on the Lifetime Wool project. So since then, sort of branched into genetics more than nutrition, but now based in Christchurch in New Zealand. Next Gen Agri is a genetics consulting company at its core, I suppose, but we do a lot of project work with Tomo and his team at Murdoch Uni on behalf of other funding organisations. But a bit of New Zealand context, I suppose, to bring to the argument. So as we know, maidens are or can be a large part of your ewe flock. A lot of people are turning over sheep quite quickly and often bringing in large numbers of maidens. And by the time you've gone through a few reproductive cycles and culled out dries and culled those haven't had lambs, you're dropping those older ewe numbers, and that maiden can be a significant component, particularly in some production systems. So they are important, and generally they've as we've already covered, have been sort of lagging a little bit behind where they'd ideally be in terms of their reproductive performance. They tend to be, if you know what you're doing in terms of genetics, they should be your best genetics. If you're actually making genetic gain, then they should be the best ones you've got. So a sort of reproductive loss or not a reproductive success in your maidens is obviously holding back the total genetic gain, because they should be your best genetics, and if they're not delivering many lambs, then you're not getting many of those genetics actually flowing through to that next generation. We've got down there the sort of pseudo wethers prior to hogget age, so they can be used. They're a bit of a tool on a farm. I guess that's the maybe one of their Achilles heels, in terms of that's back in the day when there was a lot more wethers. Then obviously we had dry sheep that we could use to clean up pastures and that sort of thing. Whereas now if we're gone ewe dominant, then the maidens are the only ones that can be used for some of those jobs, but that might be contributing to where we end up. But they certainly are an important part of the flock. So this is just some data from merinos, but yeah, just the national data versus different states in Australia, maiden versus mixed. Obviously, those numbers are, as we know, generally low, but there's always that sort of 15% or 20% reduction, and that sort of is there across a lot of different flocks. Romneys in New Zealand, it's a bit tighter. The gap is less, but generally we've got maidens that aren't doing it as well as that next age group up in terms of their number of lambs weaned per ewe maiden. So today is the first part of a 3-part series, really. So this is sort of what we know, and we're not going to pretend we know things that we don't. We're going to present the information that we're aware of. I think there's a few people that I know of that know more about what's going on than Tomo in terms of reproductive performance of sheep. So very good handle on the literature and what we do know. But as you'll sort of discover as we go through today, there's still gaps in that knowledge, and some significant ones, because we haven't really done a lot of research on these sheep. And so, yeah, next week, same time, what we'd be keen on is to have a discussion about what we don't know and get a lot of thoughts from you as well. And I guess the point of that really is to find out which bits are worth finding out more about. And then the third part is a longer term opportunity, I suppose, and that's staying involved. So this is a 5-year project. We're only very early on in it, only a few months into it. And so what we would like to do is continue build up a network of information, network of people that are trying to do different things, and actually keep sharing that information. So that'll run from the Next Gen Agri website. So we'll keep adding information and make sure you're involved in that. So the idea is that we can sort of have, as a group, and that group will hopefully grow as we go. We can all sort of work together and sort of work on this opportunity and improving maiden ewe performance throughout the next 5 years, which I'm not sure we'll have any hair left by then, but we'll see how we go. I think what's really important, and it's important in every group, I guess become a little bit harder as with COVID and that sort of thing, but these Zoom has allowed us at least to keep on track and keep the industry ticking over. But it is really, really important that you are 100% aware that you've got a lot more knowledge collectively than on your side of the screen than we have on this side of the screen in terms of we're running this meeting. But each and every one of you has run sheep and has picked up information as you've done that, and it's really important that we as through the process that we try and bring that information forward, bring what you do know to the table, because there's lots of information that you've just picked up as you've gone about your daily jobs, and that's really important that we share that, because you'll a question you ask or a comment that you make might help somebody else that's in a similar circumstance to you, and often we find that what you'll get more out of this meeting will be from some other person running sheep than those of us that organise it, and that's not a problem. That's how it should be. So feel free to contribute your thoughts and call out something if you don't think it's right, call it out and we can have a discussion, because that's where the learning comes. We've both got pretty thick skin thanks to a few decades of doing these sort of jobs. Today we're going to cover these aspects. The big ones, probably tailor-made nutrition is probably the core of the information we'll cover. I'm going to start off with bred for success and not go too deep into genetics. You didn't sign up to hear me yarn on about genetics too much. So a bit of a light touch there. Some information around selecting new replacements, and that has got a little bit of a merino focus, because some of the impacts of being born twin are much stronger in a merino because of the wool impact. I guess today we are trying to talk about every maiden ewe, so whether that's a composite or a merino. Obviously, a lot of your more meat focused breeds are joined as ewe lambs or ewe hoggets if you're in New Zealand. But we are endeavouring to cover both maternal sheep and merino sheep, or crossbred sheep, merino sheep, however you want to make that distinction. So yeah, then tailor-made nutritional, Tomo will come in there and talk about the impacts of live weight condition score and those really important aspects. And our gut feel is that in the time frame we've got, like a lot of the things that we'll be working on are around that those management type opportunities. And then nothing left to chance is where we'll finish up, which is a bit of a short sprint, but just starting to get the little things that aren't nutrition and aren't genetics that are around management that we can improve. I do mean it when I say shout out if you've got any questions or comments. That'd be really good. So bred for success. And so this is really about, and I guess in our consulting, our genetics consulting, we see people who are doing lots of the management things right, but have a vehicle, have a genotype that's just not bred to perform. So this is a bit of I guess one of the things that could be going on if you've signed up to today and you're trying to work out how to improve your maiden ewe performance. One of the things that could be going on is that you've got a genotype that's really not that interested in having lambs. And certainly they are out there either normally through a focus on other traits. So there's been a focus on breeding fine wool or breeding lots of fleece weight or whatever, and reproduction hasn't been a focus. And sometimes those genotypes do make your job of getting higher reproductive performance a bit harder than others. So this is a bit of a discussion through that, and again, without going into heaps of detail about on the genetic front. Fairly simple stuff here, but I guess we know that what we're looking at is the phenotype, what we can see and what we can measure in those maiden ewes. Part of how they look or how they perform is obviously due to their genetic makeup, and then part of how they perform and look is due to how they've been raised, the climate, whether they're a single or twin, whether they were out of a maiden themselves or out of a ewe lamb themselves, how old they are in that group. So there's a whole heap of stuff that will contribute to how your individual performance of those animals goes. And part of that is genetics, and then part of that is nutrition. So, and we know that, but often we think, I guess our job when we're actually setting up that genetic profile of those animals is to try and work out what is genetic and what is environment when you're buying rams. Because when you go to a ram sale and you're trying to bring home some genes that will improve your general performance, and maiden ewe performance will be one of those things. Trying to work out what's actually going to change the next generation is the important part of that. And you would have heard me talk about that stuff at length if you've listened to me for very long. You will have heard me say this as well, but it's really important that when we are buying those rams and we're thinking about general performance, is that those rams themselves aren't the things that matter. It's what's swinging between their legs is, or their genes that they can bring into the flock is what's important. And so I guess the real point there is, just because it looks big, fat and shining on sale day doesn't mean that it's got the genes that will help your maiden ewe performance or anything else. It's about really trying to understand what's under the hood, what is actually under the skin that can drive reproduction, because there's a few visual cues to reproduction, and they are head cover, open heads are more highly reproductive. Wrinkle, plainer sheep have greater reproduction. There's a few things like that you can see, but most of the things that you can see in terms of driving reproduction are all impossible to see, and so you need some tools to be able to find those genes or find those rams that are more likely to have a higher reproductive performance, as well as a performance for the other traits that are important to you. And that might be early growth, that might be wool production or fine wool or whatever that happens to be. What we do know is that most of what you see in any ram is not due to genes. Most of the variation is due to other things. Some of those things we know about, like the weather, whether they're born, single, twin, where they are, location will impact on what they look like and how they measure, how old they are, whether they've been housed or not, and then nutrition. All of those things come into it. And then there's a range of other things that are sort of more random and less defined. But most of what we see is not due to genes. So buying rams is a job that needs to be done, thinking about how do I get hold of the genetic potential to bring home higher reproductive performance as well as other performance into my flock. And so that's where breeding values come into the equation, and you're not going to get me talking about genetics without talking about breeding values. And so what's in a breeding value? Basically, the important thing about breeding values is that all those things are taken into account. So they do give you the best look into the genes of the animal, of anything that we've got available to us. They take into account, importantly, the pedigree of the trait, and that's particularly important. It's important for everything, but it's really important for reproductive traits, because we know that a single record for reproduction. So if that, and we'll cover this as we go through, but if that ram happened to be born a twin, that could be because it's born out of an old ewe that was in good condition, so therefore she was more likely to twin, or it could be that it was brought out of a ewe that was actually genetically more likely to have twins, and you really can't tell from that single measure. But when you actually stack that up with a deep pedigree, you start getting its sisters and mothers and grandmothers and all those ewes in the flock and their reproductive performance. All of that gets taken into account into a breeding value, and then all of a sudden you've got a good indication of what that ram is likely to do in terms of his daughters in your flock. So for traits like reproduction, it's really, really important to use breeding values to try and find those sheep, because there's no other way you can actually identify them in your ram supplier. If you contrast that with something like micron, which is very heritable, 60% heritability, lots of the variation that you see between individuals is due to genes. So you can literally do that, change that without actually using breeding values, and you can do that with a fair degree of accuracy. Whereas reproduction, you're really up against it. And you're also up against some negative correlations that you've got to work against. So if you are interested in improving maiden ewe reproduction performance, and you think that genetics is going to be part of that puzzle, then using breeding values, and particularly the reproductive breeding values, is going to be a critical part of your future. And it's all a bit late for the Australians, because most of this has occurred by now in terms of your ram buying. So the number of lambs weaned breeding value, NLW, is the one that is most important at the moment for that trait. So it is literally how many more lambs you would expect from that sire, or from that sire's daughters. And this is some data from Cashmore Oakley, and you'll see a few more graphs from the team there, and we'll acknowledge them as we go. Tomo in particular has over a long time had great collaborations with people that collect a lot of data on farm, and so you'll see some of those graphs as we go throughout today. But as you'd expect, that half the genes coming from dad, half the genes coming from mum, that a sire with a 1% improvement in number of lambs weaned would see his daughters having a 0.5% improvement in lambs weaned, and that's exactly what we see. As number of lambs weaned of the sire, the breeding value of the sire goes up, their ewes or his daughters are actually doing exactly what you would expect, in weaning more lambs. And obviously as they get older, they wean more. That's the environmental effect, but the genetic effect is also there. And so you're seeing there a sort of a 30% range in NLW, and you're seeing a 15% range in in actual lambs weaned from those progeny. So there's no doubt that that breeding value works. Often it's sort of people think, oh, it's a low heritability trait, so let's not worry about it. But the reality is it does work, and it works in those maidens as you would expect, and it's consistent across those different age groups. How are we going for questions or thoughts or comments?
Mark?
Thanks,
Mark,
Leslie.
I've got a question about the ewes. If you're in a position to measure the ewe performance as well, how much more useful is it if you've got data on performance of a ewe's daughters as well as the ram's daughters? Because I'm in that position, of course, being a situation where we lamb inside. Yeah.
So, definitely for people that breed rams or people that are intensive, like yourself, Leslie, and you do both of those things, that becomes really important. And that's what sort of what a breeding value takes into account. But if you haven't got a breeding value, then looking at that a ewe's lifetime reproductive record, that becomes much more heritable. If she's had 3 or 4 sets of twins and reared them, then you know that she is genetically more likely to, and a son from her is genetically more likely to do so as well. So the more records you've got, the better or the more consistent, the more accurate you can be with that selection. So you just go into your flock with 1 year's records, you'll get some influence, but if you go in there with your full set of records and use all that information, then you'll get a pretty good indication of which ones have the higher reproductive genes. So you can definitely use that. And so those ewes that sort of reared twins 3 or 4 years in a row, we know that they're likely to carry genes for high reproduction.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question. So the things that, so number lambs weaned is the standard breeding value for reproduction. That's the one that if you can get it and you can get an accurate one of that, definitely use that one. The industry has just released new breeding values for that trait, which split it up into litter size, conception, litter size, and ewe rearing ability, which is more useful, because if we just select on number lambs weaned, you tend to just improve litter size, and what we want often is actually to improve lamb survival or ewe rearing ability, not necessarily end up with heaps more twins. Sometimes we just want to actually keep what we've got alive, more alive, and we'll cover. That's sort of what I guess Tom and I are passionate about, is a lot around lamb survival rather than massive scannings for the hell of it. It's about actually getting more lambs on the ground. Lambs weaned. Anyway, so those different traits are there. I don't want to confuse you too much tonight on that. If you want to get more into that, get in touch and we can talk more about that. But I'll just sort of go through the ones that we know, in addition to those reproductive breeding values, we know that are correlated with reproduction and are correlated with kind of ease of management for these maiden ewes. And I think first cab off the rank is growth. Selecting for sheep with higher growth gives you plenty of options. We know that it's favourably correlated with reproductive performance across all age group, including maiden performance. But you're going to see a lot of graphs later on, a lot of information about 2 things. And one thing is live weight, and another thing is condition score. And both of those things, while are importantly under nutritional control and management control, they're also under genetic control. So giving yourself a head start or a leg up in terms of actually finding sheep that are more likely to grow gives you options. So if you've got high early growth, so a high post-weaning weight breeding value in the size you're using, or a high weaning weight breeding value in the size you're using, you know that those sheep are genetically likely to grow. Then you've got the rest of that puzzle is how you feed them to achieve that potential. But if you've got a sheep that doesn't really want to grow because its genes are low for those growth traits, it's going towards a low adult weight, then you're up against it to try and get that early growth and meet the targets that we're going to talk about. But so I think growth is probably your greatest risk management tool for mating, getting new maidens going, getting maidens up to their weights and having reproductive performance, is just sheep that actually want to grow early. I'm a big fan of sort of early maturing sheep that lay down fat and muscle early. I think over my career, what we've found is that they are the sheep with higher muscle and fat breeding values. And so there's two things here. We're going to drive growth, but we're also going to drive condition score at the same time in terms of genetics. So each of those dots is an individual group of progeny from a single sire. It's across a few number of years in New Zealand. They're all sort of fine wool sheep, Corriedales and finer. And on the vertical axis is the condition score of that team at its first mating, at its normal maiden ewe mating at sort of 15 months old. 19 months old. And on the horizontal axis is the breeding value for fat depth at the ultrasound measured at their C site for those sires. And so what you can see there is as that's going up, then the condition score of that sire's daughters is also going up to the point that you've got kind of and in most years we get about between a 0.7 and a full condition score difference between sire groups for condition score. And those sheep have been running together preconception. They've run together their entire lives through pregnancy, through everything. And so we know that condition score is going to be a driver of your maiden ewe performance. We know that live weight is going to be a driver as well. So having genetics that actually want to do it, that actually volunteer to be in higher condition is certainly one of the things that will be part of the puzzle of improving maiden ewe performance. I could also have muscling on this graph. It's sort of interchangeable with fat. They tend to go together. So higher muscling, higher fat tends to be sheep which have better condition score. And that makes sense. Where you ultrasound test for fat and muscle is exactly the same spot you put your hand to condition score them. So that doesn't make that's not any great rocket science there. But I think this trait and growth, early growth, as well as that number of lambs weaned, I think setting up a sheep to be hitting the straps early is going to be part of maiden ewe performance. And we're seeing that happen in commercial flocks. We're seeing commercial flocks doing massive reproductive rates in their maidens by nailing some of this into their sheep. So I'm not going to harp too much more on that, but just wanted to, I guess, cover some of the other things that are important. Sire selection for maidens. Anyone want to tell me how they select? Do they select different rams for their maiden ewes compared to the rest? Anyone do anything different? Let's say that's a no. So if they're just going back to your normal maternal sheep, then that's fine. Then you're just mating. You're mating them to your normal. So if you're a merino flock, then you're mating to merino. If you're a maternal flock, you're mating to the same rams. If some people will cull out some of their maidens and then mate them to a terminal sire, if that's the case, then obviously there's some things you need to take into account. It seems from Paul Kenyon and others, if that's actually a ewe lamb mating or a ewe hogget mating, if you call them in New Zealand, but yeah, that mating at 7 or 8 months of age, then the sire is less important because that ewe is still growing, and so she's actually got a pretty good control over ewe birth weight herself. Lamb birth weight herself, so less important in them. And we have got people mating terminals over their ewe lambs without causing too much grief. That becomes different when you get into a ewe, like a normal maiden joining, where you've got them, if you've done a good job of growing them out, your culls tend to be the ones that are a bit, maybe not quite as good in the carcass, maybe not quite as good in everything. And so mating them to a big square terminal is probably a bad idea. So people do a range of things. One of the things is they control that by breed, by using a cheviot or something that's a bit easier birthing. The thing you can use in terminals is the breeding values for those terminals you're buying. And this is obviously in Australia with the lamb plan breeding values. You can look at the birth weight breeding value, and in the terminal analysis back in April, that was about 0.36 was the average. So buying an animal that's lighter than that at birth, so lower number than that, so down into your 0.2s or 0.3s, 0.2s, means that genetically that lamb is going to be lighter birth weight, so that gives that ewe half a chance. A lot of just normal good stockmanship type stuff, looking at the shoulders, making sure they're they're a good smooth shoulder. That is important, and those things sort of come out in lamb in these breeding values for lambing ease. So lambing ease for the daughters is less important if you're just buying a terminal ram, but lambing ease direct is the likelihood that sire is going to throw lambs that get stuck for you. So getting a good number there is important. Yeah, so it's certainly worth looking at those numbers if you're buying terminals to go over your maiden ewes. There's often a discussion around whether you put your best rams over your maidens or whether you save them for four-tooths. We're going to present some information in a minute around how that maiden ewe performance is actually a good screen for how they go later on. So there is a case where you don't put your best. You actually, I guess, as we improve maiden ewe performance, then that would be a good plan. But if you've got low maiden ewe performance, then you might want to save your better rams for your four-tooths that have already proven their reproductive worth in that previous year. That will be case dependent, but they're discussions or conversations that you should be having about which rams go to which ewes. Any comments or thoughts there? What I wanted to do now is just you to have a bit of a think about whether your genetics are optimized for maiden ewe performance. Do you think there's anything genetic that's holding you back? And I might throw us into three different rooms if we can unmute and just have a think and have a chat with whoever you end up with. We'll do that for a couple of minutes, then we'll come back. So you're gonna, when I press the button, you're gonna end up in a random. There's gonna be random people on your screen. The thing you want to talk about is say good day, obviously, but then also, are your genetics optimized for maiden ewe performance? Do you think there's any of what we've just covered, or other things that you've thought about that would suggest that you could be making improvements around genetics? Is that clear? Any questions? Right, you're going to end up in a few rooms. We'll see how that goes. Right, anyone want to share what they were chatting about?
I just said that we're in a period of change, so it's only onward and upward from now. So they're not there yet, but we'll get there.
Cool. Going in the right direction, I hear.
That's it.
Anyone else?
Yeah, we're a bit the same, Ferg.
Yeah, right.
Shifting studs and trying to see if we can make a few improvements.
Yeah, right. Cool. Thanks, Brad. All right. We're going to assume no one else wants to talk to me. But yeah, thanks for that. So hopefully that was a good yarn with somebody. Obviously, one of the things around maidens is that we get to play God with and work out which ones we're going to keep. And I guess there's a few for maternals, composites, that sort of stuff. It's probably not as critical, but for merino sheep, there's a few fish hooks in that, which are worth knowing about. And we're yet to probably come up with a really good plan how we minimise that. Other than, well, we've got a few ways, but worth knowing some of the pitfalls, I suppose, of selecting. And often you'll get somebody else in, and they'll be sometimes a well-respected person who comes in and will pull out some particular sheep. I guess the important thing is that we're not inadvertently selecting against reproductive performance. So this is some data I did as part of an AWI project, and this is Marinotech WA's data. Should have a logo on there, I haven't. So Marinotech WA are a sort of group breed sheep as a group in Western Australia. They've been doing that for 25, 30 years. And the reason I analysed their data is because they've recorded lots and lots of physical stuff over a long period of time. So the same person has scored the same traits for generations and generations and generations, and they've collected full pedigree. So it's quite a unique data set. And what I was really looking for is well, a range of things, but one of the things I was looking for is if you were born twin in that flock, how did you score across all this range of traits? And and when we look into it, we knew some of these things. Like we knew that you're going to be. So this data here is the impact of being born a twin in that flock. And so at weaning, you're a couple of kilos lighter. We know that. And at hogget age, you're still a bit lighter, but it's come back a bit. We know that you're going to be stronger. So, and Tomo's the guru of follicle development, but through being born twin, there's two lambs sharing the nutrition during pregnancy, and therefore secondary follicle development doesn't occur as, or the branching of secondary follicles isn't as much in those twin-born lambs. So you actually end up with a broader micron that cut a bit less wool as a twin. They're slightly shorter in the wool, but the things that were interesting to me were that they were less nourishment, less luster, lower crimp definition, lower density, blockier staples, less defined staples, and obviously they had more lambs because there's a bit of a genetic effect there. So pretty much when you're flicking through merinos and you're looking at all the things that good merino people look at, the twins are at a disadvantage across pretty much everything you're seeing, and each of those individual things means probably bugger all, like it's a small impact. But when you add them all up, and you've got your sort of wool goggles on and you're looking at that sheep, then you're likely to cull those. Well, you're more likely to cull those twins because of all those compounding factors. And so that's something that I think is really important, that we don't, when we're classing sheep, we have to be really careful. We're not just ripping out all those twins. So we're doing everything we can in our management and our genetics to increase the amount of twins we've got. Then we, or somebody else that comes in to look at them, then takes out a disproportionate number of those twins. And so we were keen to know whether that actually happens. And the Merino Lifetime Productivity Project funded by AWI, Bronwyn Clark runs that. Bronwyn Clark's from Murdoch Uni. She runs that on behalf of the Pindley Site Committee, and EMS is involved there as well. So there's a whole football team of people that are involved in that project, and just want to acknowledge all of them. But this is when they go in. So in that project, you go in blind. The classes go in blind and just classing individual animals, as we all do when we go into a flock. So they don't know who's a single and who's a twin, but obviously the database does. And these are the proportions of when you go through the tops, and these are 2 different years, 2 different drops of progeny. And when you go through so the lambs of that class are pulls off as tops, and in this flock is about half of these sheep are twins and half of them are single. And so you go and you look at the tops and you go, right, well, 70% of the animals that class are called tops were actually born single, and 30% of them are born twin. You go back down the other end of that spectrum where we're down at the culls, so that's the ones they hated, and it's the opposite. So 70% of the animals that were culled were twin born, and 30% of the animals that were retained were single born. And that happened across both those groups. Was actually worse in one year than another, and right through that profile. And so this is happening at a massive scale across the industry. We're going in and we're classing sheep with not a lot of information at a big scale across the industry. So, and so I think we've got a problem if we're trying to improve reproductive performance. What we also know is that the lambs born out of maiden ewes are worse again. So if we're just going in, here's our drop of lambs, we're going to go through, we're going to pick retain our sheep for our next population. Those that were born twin are at disadvantage, those that were born out of a maidens. And if you're twin out of a maiden, you've got bugger all chance of making the cut. So that's what's happening at scale. So we need to think about how we do that. And it could be just as simple as a notch or a tag or a record of who's born twin. And so we treat them fairly. We class them as a group. We're still going to take them out. They don't get a free ride, but they actually get classed in their contemporary group with their other twins out of maidens, so that we rip out the same proportion of those, because they're carrying the genes for performance and the genes that you want. They just don't look as shiny as those singles born out of older ewes. So important thing. And one of the question that Leslie's just asked is, in a merino flock, should we just be selecting for singles? And what we know is that we can, and that's kind of been the solution for the merino game because you can keep them finer and the wool looks better. But we do know that you can, through nutrition of that twin-born ewe or twin-bearing ewe, you can correct or right some of the wrongs, not all of them, but you can make that a lot better than what it is if you just run them together. And we know that particularly when COVID strikes and other things, that the number of lambs weaned is an important profit driver on most merino product places. Unless you're running a big swag of wethers, then not worrying about twins is a relevant thing to do because you just need enough ewes to replace your wether flock. Most systems like that have disappeared. Generally, it's a dual production system now, with wool being in most cases less than 50% of the income, even if you're fairly merino dominant. And so both of those income streams are important. You do take a hit a little bit on those individual performance by going for twins, but often they're there anyway. Often we've got them conceived, and so all the damage, a lot of this damage is done pre-lambing. And so you've actually got them conceived, which is the worst scenario, where they're born twin, one of them dies. So it's born, you get the impact of being born a twin, but its mates didn't make it. So you've actually got the worst scenario if you've got low lamb survival, which is why we talk a lot about trying to get many of them to survive. So I think this is sort of some of the most exciting data that we as an industry are definitely got the handbrake on reproductive performance by going in and classing predominantly on wool traits. And that's a merino focus.
So Ferg, because we're trying to reduce our breech wrinkle, for the singles it's worse, isn't it? Like for them, who, like in the marking cradle, we tagged all of the score, like 4.5s for breech.
Yeah.
And because the twins are plainer, aren't they?
Yeah. So yeah, when you're doing that sort of stuff, again, yeah.
So that works in our favour in a way, but
and for a reproductive favour, but yeah, but again, those singles are being a little bit harshly treated because they are probably half a wrinkle score, more wrinkly. Yep.
But still, they still need to go for us, don't they?
Still chop heads off. Yep. So I guess we're talking before about how you're classing and going through, and how much, I guess, better it is to let the ram do some of that work. This is some data from Mr. Tomo's data. One's from Cashmere Oakley. They're a maternal composite or a Coopworth, and then Pudgenuck or a merino. And this is whether that lamb or that ewe was born a single or twin, then their subsequent reproductive performance. So there is a slight improvement in reproductive performance by selecting twins, and we've seen that over time. If you select twins, then you do get sort of more twins over time. It's slow, and your impact will be much higher by bringing in rams with higher reproductive or genetics for reproduction. But there is a general positive. If you're born a twin, then you're more likely to scan slightly higher throughout your lifetime. So there's that is one of the ways you can improve reproductive performance by selecting those twins. A better way is actually using the ram or using that first reproductive event to actually do that screening. And so this is from ewes that were joined as a ewe lamb, joined at 7 or 8 months of age, and then this is their scanning and reproductive result as a normal maiden, as a 24-month-old animal when they're lambed. And so you see there those that scanned 2 and read, or scanned 2 but lost both, they weaned 134 in that next year, whereas those that didn't get pregnant at all only weaned 109. And then within this flock, this is Cashmere Oakley data, and there's no attempt made to feed up those ewes. They will go back together after mating. And so you see a bit of a drop back in the ones that weaned twins, because they would have been lighter at mating and so scanned less, but still did a lot better. They weaned 2 the previous year, but they did a lot better than what the dries did from that same group. So it is a great screen for their reproductive performance going forward. The other really interesting thing to note here is the impact on ewe live weight itself. So this is their weight at that hogget joining, was it, Tomo? Or anyway, somewhere in
Yes, food, hogget joining, yep.
Yeah. So those ewes that scanned and weaned twins as a ewe lamb were sitting at sort of 10 kilos lighter than some of these other groups of ewes. So a great way of capping sort of mature weight and therefore less maintenance requirement for that ewe, yet still a really handy reproductive performance is that, yeah, so we know that that'll impact on their mature weight. So it's a great way of getting a much more efficient system. So really much better screen for those ewes that are actually useful in your flock is actually getting a ram in there and working out which ones are reproductive. This is a traditional mating, so mating as a maiden, so lambing at 24 months. Again, those that didn't lamb at all, this is going on. These are two different flocks, both merinos. These are in New South Wales, these are in Western Australia. And in each of those flocks, there was a lift from, if you're dry as a maiden, then your subsequent reproductive performance was lower than if you twinned as a maiden. So again, a great screen for those that are going to go on and be reproductive and that's why a dry maiden is something that you can seriously consider culling if you've got the numbers, because her subsequent performance will be less than the other ewes in the flock. Anyone want to tell me how they currently select their ewes to retain? Who does it? How they do it? No worries. So we'll move on. But I guess a lot of that will be done without information. And I think, yeah, what we're encouraging, I suppose, is to start finding simple systems to make sure we're not inadvertently culling those lambs from twins and definitely, or born twin and definitely twins out of maidens. All right, Tomo, people are sick of listening to me, so I'll hand over to you.
Oh, Fer, can I ask a question? You know, with the condition score, like when they're twins and they're maidens, are they, like if they're lighter and all that, are they skinnier? Like, you know, when you had the twins, whether a single born, a twin.
So they would have been, or
are they just smaller and fatter?
I think they're smaller and fatter, so it actually drops their standard reference weight. So yeah, at the same condition score, they will be lighter. Is that right, Tommy? Yeah.
So if I was going through my maidens tomorrow, I was being harsh, I could pull out skinny ones if others are fat. Like if
as long as they've all weaned the same number of lambs, yeah.
Oh no, but if they haven't.
Like, oh no, you haven't
lambed yet.
Oh yeah, no, skinny ones are good to go. Yep.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. Is that clear, Ferg? Okay. Yeah, what I'd like to cover is what we do know about, I guess, some key targets for weaning weight, post-weaning growth, joining weights for maidens. So talking about the 19-month-olds here, but happy to take any questions on younger ewes as well, and then maybe some comment on targets for during the maiden pregnancy to lambing as well. So roll on, Ferg. So I guess and I don't know if you've heard me or others, but maximising weaning weight, I guess, is objective number one. If we're trying to, because I think where I'll get to with this is that forever we've been told that 80% mature weight is probably a target for your maidens at 19 months. We'll have a much better picture on that, over the next couple of months, as it turns out. We're hoping it was going to be ready for today, but I'm fairly convinced that it should be somewhere between 90 and 100. So I think there's a strong case now for much higher maiden weights, hogget weights than previous. So to get there, we've got to have things humming along from day one. So, and that starts with maximising growth to weaning. So, and what I guess the order of priority there, it really is about feed on offer. How much feed we can have in front of them during lactation. And I guess what we do know from the Lifetime Wool Project and the follow-on Lifetime Maternals Project, that feed on offer is even more critical for merinos. So in other words, you know, if the target's 1,500, 1,800 kilos, and you've only got 700 because of season or whatever it may be, you know, the penalty in growth rates is going to be more for a merino flock than a maternal. The maternals do seem to have this greater ability to I guess, milk off their back. I guess the feed on offer is definitely number one. The next is legume content. Again, fairly obvious, you might say, but we'll come to a little bit of data on just how important that is as well. And then probably third in the hierarchy is condition score at lambing. That you know, condition score at lambing is critical to keep them alive in the first couple of days, of course, but its actual effect on growth to weaning is not massive or not as big as those other 2 points. But still, the condition score at lambing is a critical target to achieve. And you know, currently we're saying around 3 for singles, and that stands if you're a merino or a maternal, and then sort of 3.4, 3.5 are the current targets for merino or maternals carrying multiples. I'll come back to it a few times, but I think there's a really strong case for differential management of multiples, and I'm guessing, Leslie, you're from the UK, and obviously there might be a couple of Kiwis online, and I know in your parts of the world that's standard practice, but it's not in Australia. You know, 20-25% of ewes are scanned for multiples only. I think it's 90% in New Zealand. So in fact, it's our biggest, you know, it's still the number one thing we're trying to change, because all the, you know, as simple as it might sound, you know, everything spins off being able to identify, you know, who's got what, not only during pregnancy, but during lambing, and even, you know, through lactation, as I'll come back to as well. We'll probably roll on from there, Ferg. So just you know, showing that, I guess, in a little bit of data. This is you know, old data now, as it turns out, from where Ferg and I cut our teeth in Western Victoria. So we're talking about a fairly low growth merino, sort of 46 kilo. Gee, they were small, weren't they? 46 kilo standard reference weight. You know, fine wool. So obviously not monstrous growth rates, but key message, you know, around that, you know, 1800 towards 2000. Hard to achieve, I know, but that's, you know, that's where growth rates are going to be maximised. And you can see, you know, if we drop that off to 1,000, which obviously can be common in many parts, even you know, lambing from June onwards. You know, you might be, you know, you've dropped, you know, 30-odd%, let's say, in lamb growth rates with that suboptimal food levels. I guess the other thing there is typical, that single twin ratio. I noticed, Ferg, in your data, I think it was minus 2 kilos. I'm guessing, well, what we've got here is twins raised as twins, and singles raised as singles, and typically that difference is 4 or 5 kilos. We've seen between a rear type of 1-1 and a rear type of 2-2. So quite, again, that you need to bear that in mind as well. Just how much smaller those twins are, and you know, the challenges then of getting them up to you know, good to hit target weights, you know, over the, you know, the 15, 16 months or so after joining, after weaning. Probably go to the next one, Ferg. I think it'll be maternals. So expressed slightly differently. This is our more recent data from 4 sites around the country. You know, 6,000 or 8,000 lambs in this. I can't quite remember. 4 big sites, including Tim Leeming's, which many of you'd know. A site over here in Western Victoria, one in southeast South Australia, and a second site in Victoria as well over a couple of years. The message is essentially the same. You know, again, around that, let's say 1,500 plus 1,800 to maximise growth. I'm not saying that's the best thing to do, but that's where you've got to be if you want things to go flat out. And what we saw here was I guess less depression or less penalty in lamb growth rates. You know, if say we're running at 1,000 kilos during lactation, as opposed to the maximum. That growth rates did not seem to be as compromised as they were in the merino story. If we talk about legumes, again, just some data from across both of those experiments. I think the second dot point is probably the simplest one to remember in my mind. Again, we all know, clover is important. I guess I'm just trying to put things in context here. That about 1% clover, indeed across a couple of experiments now, we're typically seeing about an extra gram a day in lamb growth. Now that sounds rather trivial, but if you've got 30% clover versus none, you're growing at an extra, what's that, couple of 100 grams a week. You're talking 2 to 3 kilos heavier at weaning. So I think it does really reinforce just how important clover, if we are talking about high performance systems, and it's even more important if we're joining new lambs, but where you've just got to have things flying from, as I said, from day one. Clover is critical, no question about that. So just trying to put that one, some scale on that. What have we got next? This is further data. Sort of Ferg mentioned it earlier. So what did I talk about then? The 1-1 25.5 versus the 2-2. So there's your 5 kilo difference there between a birth type rear type of single born, single reared versus twin born, twin reared, and we see that in both these data sets across different breeds, about that 5 kilo penalty in weaning weight. I guess the message there was really around this extra variability that's added by in fact it's huge, isn't it? We've got almost a 10 kilo change there due to birth type rear type between 1-1s and 3-3s, and we might not get a whole lot of them, but this, I guess, when we've got that variation superimposed on extended joinings, for example, that's why we can end up getting 15 kilos to 35 kilo weaners, and once we get that big range or bigger range, I guess the whole management system becomes much more complex. Starting with when do you wean, how do you manage the tail, and so on. I guess it becomes a little bit more challenging. Simple things like post-weaning nutrition. Again, if you've got that 20 kilo spread in weaning weights, their nutritional requirements are going to be vastly different. So I guess we just, it's not the end of the world. We just lack precision. We're not going to have things going quite as well as we might otherwise if we'd bunched them up. And obviously people are now talking about even shorter joinings, and it's going to be interesting to see how that progresses over the next couple of years. So I think I can probably move on from there, Ferg. So I guess, I'll just try to put some dollars and cents around this. And as I said, these actually arrived this morning. But through this project, we work with a fellow called John Young, and he's got some quite complex models, and he we do hope to come up with far more robust targets on what is the optimum. It's all about, I guess, making money, but is a main reason, but it's all good to sit here and say big is better, but we do, money counts in the end. So with John's involvement, with certainly over the first 12 months of this project, I think we'll get some much firmer targets in terms of the economic optimum, weaning targets, 12-month targets, 19-month targets, to get the most out of our maidens and make more money. But to put, I guess, the quick and dirty that John's done was, again, just looking at a range of prices. And I guess the case for, I guess, some of those things I mentioned, getting your food targets right, getting some clover into your pasture, hitting ewe condition score pre-lambing and so on, so our lambs can grow. The case to do that is obviously greater as prices increase. So that's just the reflection of the slope. Okay, we've taken the farm profit numbers off because they're specific to the scenario modelled. But again, it makes sense that as meat prices go up, the case to get our lambs to grow at their maximum rate is somewhat high. At a 650, I haven't checked in on prices over in your part of the world, New Zealand at the moment, but the modelling here suggested sort of $1 to $1.50 per weaner for every extra kilo we could put on the lambs by weaning time. Okay, so I don't think we probably want to get obsessed by the numbers. As I said, we'll get more robust numbers as we go on over the next few months and into the project. And where do the benefits come from? Maybe we could just make one more comment on weaning weights, Ferg. I mean, obviously the major benefit is the extra weight on the wether progeny. Okay, that's indeed 60% or 70% of the benefits from feeding or better nutrition pre-weaning comes from that angle. The wether weights, a portion, in fact the next biggest contributor, which is quite interesting, comes from wool. I mean, we hang our heads a little bit and wool prices are down, although they're looking a bit more exciting over the last little while, and in Australia at least. Even in today or fairly depressed times in some way, even in our adult sheep, our young sheep, whatever, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're still getting about 25% back in our feed costs from extra wool. So even with the market as it is, it was 50, not too long ago, as in half the feeding costs came straight back in extra wool, but 25% or so is still not to be sneezed at and needs to be considered. So even getting those weaners bigger, that still contributes to wool value at their first shearing and is one of the sources of benefit. The next biggest benefit is from weaner survival. Again, we haven't put a whole lot of effort in this series on weaner survival because I guess we're getting our lambs to grow flat out, so they're going to be over these critical weights needed for weaners to survive. But maybe we can just come back to it quickly. The target weaning weight is around 40% of mature weight, and I don't think that's changed too much. Okay, so if we're a 60 kilo ewe, around 24 kilos is sort of the target weight, and we know that below that is a fairly steep cliff in terms of survival going down. But if you can get to 40% mature weight by weaning, maybe in a lot of those southern Australian environments, maybe 45% by Christmas or going into the dry period, is a good target to have. So we're picking up some of this benefit in weaner survival. And the fourth contributor, despite the topic of this project, is that extra benefit in maiden ewe performance. Okay, so even getting your weaners bigger, it has the benefit down the track in terms of hobble ewe performance as well. So we can go to the next one. Again, let's say we've got them to weaning. We've hit our targets there. 40% at weaning, 45%, going into our summer. An even more important target is what is their growth rate post weaning, and obviously again that's going to influence our sale weight on our wethers, our hobble ewe performance and wool production, as I said. But the other one which comes into play a little bit more here is weaner survival. Okay, weaners, you can't. In fact, I was just trying to think half an hour ago. I think when I started, 30 odd years ago, it was quite common to think about feeding weaners to maintain weight. I think weaners which maintain weight die now, and I guess the recommendation we've been running around with for maybe the last 5 to 10 years has been to grow your weaners at 50 grams a day. So guy called Angus Campbell did a fair bit of work, and he actually found that the cliff was probably like 20 to 30 grams a day, but obviously that's not manageable. You can't manage sheep to that level of precision. So I guess that's why we always have been saying, 50 grams a day, 1.5 kilos a month is a pretty safe target. If the objective was just to reduce losses. What we've now showing again as a reflection of the current markets, I think there's an even stronger case to be feeding towards 100 grams a day. Okay, so or 3 kilos a month, or the far right hand side of of the slide which is shown there. Okay, so I think that that case again, John Young, our modeller, the numbers he provided this morning was the benefits might be in the order, if we can go from 50 grams a day, if we can say that's where we've been historically, or recent times, by going to 100 grams a day, an extra 1.5 kilos a month, the benefits could be in the order of $5 to $7 a weaner. So again, without getting too obsessed on the specifics, but I guess putting all that together, the case to do things right, to make sure they grow flat out to weaning, and then to manage their growth thereafter, is as strong as it's ever been. What have we got next, Steve? Unless you wanted to break on any of that. Maybe we can do 2 more slides and then we can have a bit of a break.
Leslie just asked Tomo, her lamb, she gets lambs to weaning, growing to weaning well, but then struggles to get them to grow after that, with decent legumes in the pasture. I don't know if you've got any.
Just say that again.
So Leslie's got them growing well to weaning, but then struggles to get them to growing post weaning.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to
elaborate. You're talking you're saying you just haven't got the pasture base there, Leslie, or the.
No, we got really good clover. We got brilliant clover pastures. They just don't eat the stuff. They just don't seem to steam on. I mean, we've got very traditional superfine genetics. So we're talking not huge sheep anyway, 45, 55 kilo ewes. So they're not big meat frames. Yeah. So I'm just wondering whether I'm expecting too much. I mean, 50 grams per day is okay for us, yeah. But we see a range of 40 to sort of 60, and then a few outliers either side of that growing post-weaning.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, we don't have an off-the-cuff response, Leslie. Probably, I would have thought you've still got, and you're saying you're weaning on the green feed, presumably.
Yeah.
So still, yeah. So I guess I'm not too sure why those growth rates wouldn't be better than that.
No. I mean, we had an issue. We had an issue this year with coccidiosis. We know we had that, so we sorted that out. Yeah. But I don't think that's a yearly problem. But I think we need to sort of try and get the grip on what's going on there and why we're, just not getting. They just don't seem to want to eat.
Yeah.
It's funny, very odd. Anyway, I won't take up more time.
No, you're right. Good to break it up. So I guess that leads to what our targets are. I mean, and what we don't know too much about is how do I get, as I said, I think we can grow them at 1.5 or more kilos a month, or at least 50 grams a day. But as I said, I think the case is stronger to grow them at even 100 grams a day or towards 100. But so I guess that would set them on path to be around 65% of mature weight at say 10 months of age, 9 or 10 months of age. So maybe in going into winter in our environment, I don't know how that compares to the farmers online here from Southern Australia, but you're talking 37 to 40 kilos, something like that, going into the winter period. Then in terms of where we want them at joining time, I guess what we found is that if we look at live weight at hog at joining versus their reproductive rate or number of lambs born, I'm happy to use that interchangeably. What's intriguing about, or what appears to be intriguing about the 19-month-old is that the response is about, and these lines here just represent different flocks, okay? The yellow one again is Cashmore Oakley. You know, there's 5,000 animals in that lot. You know, there's a lot of animals there. I think the blue one is Pudgenook. You know, doesn't matter. The common feature of those lines is that the response is about 1.3% per kilo. Okay, so for every extra kilo in weight at hogget age, we scanned an extra, you know, 1.3%. Okay, so you know, so let's take an example. You know, 50 kilos. You know, what's the blue line scanned at? What, 105 or so? You know, at 60 kilos. You know, scanned at 120 or whatever. Okay, so that response is much less. It's less than we see in adults. Okay, typically in adults, 2 to 2.5%. Okay, and typically in ewe lambs, i.e. 7 to 10 months, 4%. All right, so I guess I've seen this for a while, but I've never probably pulled all the data together. You would have thought logically that maidens, 19-month-olds would be somewhere in between, you know, somewhere in between a 7-month-old and adult. But it does seem to be across multiple data sets that they are less responsive to the actual condition they get to at joining. I don't think I've seen a data set where you know, you would get above 2%. So I don't know. So that's I guess just quietly. That's one thing that'd be great to try to, you know, collect some data over the course of this project on your flocks, and you know, and we can, you know, firm this up. But you know, there are big numbers in this. I could have put another half a dozen flocks on that graph, and they would have shown us the same story. Okay, they seem to be non-responsive. That could send a message that joining weight's not important. Okay, or joining weight in hoggets is not so important. But there's another piece to the jigsaw, which I'll show in a second, which I think does say that joining weight is important, and I think it's more important than what we've said before. So it is a best guess, okay, not a total guess, maybe an educated guess, but I think our merino targets will settle at around 90% standard reference weight plus or minus a bit. Okay, so as I said, we've come from thinking that 80% standard reference weight was a target for joining. As a 19-month-old, I'm pretty sure we'll find that under the new markets, our targets will be somewhere in this around 90% plus or minus a bit. And it'll be the top end of that. Well, it's higher than normal because of the higher meat prices. And then I think it'll be the top end of that range where we have longer growing seasons and autumn lambing. It's probably going to be easier to achieve as well. With maternals, I think it'll be 100 plus or minus a bit. Okay, so there's a good case. You know, extra lambs are worth more in a maternal system. So I think that what we'll find is these targets will be higher than what they are in merinos. I guess this is where we're very open at the start to say we don't know anything. You know, sorry, we don't know everything. We do know a few things, but I also don't think those targets will be affected much by whether you have a lamb as a ewe lamb. Okay, so if you are in a system where you join at 7 to 9 months, let's say, I suspect these targets for their 19-month-old joining will still hold. But as I said, we'll know a little bit more over the not too distant future. Maybe we could just go to the next slide, Ferg, and then we can stop. This is the reason. That's one of the reasons I think that does make us think that the joining weight is far more or is important, despite the earlier graph which I just showed. And what's happened here, and we've only got one data set on this, so there's the caution, but it is 5,000 ewes. is if we can feed our hoggets or get to a higher hogget weight, yes, they give us that extra 1.3 lambs born or whatever I said. But what we also find is that they are also better the following year as a 3-year-old and also better as a 4-year-old. Okay, so the benefit of feeding or managing your maidens better to 19 months old is amplified because it pays back over a couple of years to come. So what we found, this is the Pudgeonok data set. So what we found there, if you actually looked at the first 3 lambings of their lifetime, so it was a 2, 3, 4-year-old, you know, the extra 10 kilos at their hogget joining delivered, you know, about 0.4 of an extra lamb per ewe over those first 3 attempts. So Fergus, probably a good place to stop. I don't know what's next, but that'll do. Yes, I don't know whether that's our current state of knowledge. So I don't know if there's any questions on that, or you want to chip in, Ferg?
Any questions out there, or very quiet? It's like,
Well, Tomo, I've just got to ask a question. You're talking about weight at joining, but does that feed into the weight gain during joining?
Yeah, great
as
question.
well?
Yeah, don't know. Is the honest answer? I mean, in adults, it doesn't. There's nothing special about weight gain during joining, right? In that, if they grow in an adult, if they grow quicker during joining, they have more lambs because they're heavier when the ram hits them. Okay, that's you know, we haven't found from all our data set, which would be hundreds of thousands of ewes, that there's any additional benefit over and above that. Okay, they grow quicker, they're a couple of kilos heavier when the ram gets them, and you get a few more lambs. In ewe lambs, at 7 to 9 months of age, there is definitely a major advantage of growing quicker over and above the fact that they're a bit heavier when the ram gets them. Okay, so I should know this off the top of my head, but you know, like growing in ewe lambs, growing at 100 grams a day, well, you know, gives about an extra 20% lambs born. Okay, and that a large part of that is over and above the fact that they're just a couple of kilos heavier when the ram gets them. We actually haven't got any data, so it's a long-winded answer, but we haven't got data to look at that in maidens. So I think there's, you know, see the safe option or the least response you would think is going to be the adult scenario, where you know you feed them better, they're a couple of kilos heavier, you know, by 2 weeks into joining. And therefore you get a few more lambs, but whether there's an effect over and above that, I'm not too sure.
I mean, anecdotally, I suppose there's been quite a few producers here trying to like really work on, here being New Zealand, on this particular issue, trying to close the gap for the maidens. And I think what we're finding is the ones that put the weight on early, so not sort of catching up and just hitting their targets as the rams are going out, but have actually got it well and truly before, seem to be going better. So it would suggest that it's less important, but that's kind of n equals a few and not replicated. So, but that seems to be the greater success is when they're up early rather than, and then kind of maintaining at that weight rather than sort of screaming up towards the target weight.
Yeah, okay, so that shows that emphasis on like your P weights and yearling weights, doesn't it, in terms of pushing that early weight, early growth, and then sort of stabilising and then somewhat of a rising plane during joining or leading into it anyway. Yeah,
as long as they're not losing weight there. And I guess that's one of the things that will hopefully some of the trial sites might look at that. I mean, I think that's probably one of our key opportunities, is working out that kind of what that growth profile looks like and how that impacts on the outcome.
Yeah, it's just, I was only looking at something on this last night actually, and certainly my head wasn't clear enough to try to put it on this big screen today. But if we looked at it appeared, and I could retract this in a couple of months' time, but if you had a 65 kilo hogget, right, and if let's say they were 45 kilos as a ewe lamb and then gained 20 kilos, during their ewe lamb joining and their hogget joining, they scanned at 180. If they were 35 kilos at their ewe lamb joining and gained 30 kilos, okay, so they both got to 65 kilos, they scanned 158. Okay, so which to me supported what you're saying, Ferg, although I'm not too sure what period you're saying.
Yeah.
Ewes that are fed quickly, to 7, 8, 9 months of age, okay, were better, okay, as a 20-month-old than someone who grew slowly early in life and then put it on later on. Okay, so yeah, the question is really how they get to their 20-month-old. Does that affect repro? I think I don't have a solid answer on it, but that was an interesting first look.
And it seems to make sense that you'd be getting, like we know the first ovulations aren't as useful, like those weaker estrus and all that sort of stuff. So the earlier they hit sort of puberty, obviously, and the earlier they hit those heavy weights and more cycles done before they're in with a ram, then that kind of makes sense. Although we need to tease a lot of that apart. But
yeah, no, I think that's a good explanation. So where to from here?
Does anyone need a break, or do you want to keep charging on? If you don't talk, we'll just keep charging on.
Sorry, I have another question. So this year, with I have more lambs than normal. Maybe in view of this, maybe I should, because like I can't run. Maybe I could sex them and run them like a post-weaning so that they make sure that all of the ewe lambs get a better go. Because the weather lambs, some will go, the wrinkly ones will go to market, and then the other ones just grow wool anyway. I mean, not an experiment, but to try and give myself a best chance with those lambs, those ewe lambs.
Yeah, I reckon you could definitely, like the growth path of your wethers, they're going to hang around for a few years, is way less important than the growth path of your ewe lamb. So you could, so as long as you could do 50 grams a day in your wethers to make sure they don't die.
Yeah.
And then 100 grams a day. Yeah.
Oh, it's very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, spot on for I was going to answer it differently because I didn't know the wethers were hanging around. But yeah, if the wethers are staying for a while, 50 grams a day it's a perfectly safe option. To keep them alive. It does make the current screen relevant of how you're going to achieve that. And that comes back to monitoring monthly, maybe again depends on how quickly your feed base is changing, but monitoring a subgroup every 4 to 6 weeks, as regularly as practically possible, really.
Bill's got a fancy new set of scales, so she'll need to use them.
Because the bad thing about this is why we added that safety net on is if you get it wrong, you really get it wrong. And if they go backwards and you're a couple of weeks late in detecting that, you're in trouble. But that's 50 grams in your wethers and as quick as you can in your ewes.
Well, that's it, because I've planted a few crops, but they weren't going to hold that meant like it wasn't going to go for very long with that amount on. So if I just save it for the ewe lambs, then because I've not really sold wether lambs ever before anyway, so anything will be good. And there's still clover and everything in normal pasture, so it's just that the ewes will get a better go. So that's very good. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions or? All right, we'll keep. So I guess, the point maybe to answer that question, because we're not going to get much chat, but as Tomo just said, for these, there is targets you need to meet with these progeny, and the only way you can meet them is weighing stuff. The iometer is not going to cut it for precision around getting really good maiden performance. Is hitting, and perhaps what we'll look at, or what we will look at throughout this project is having those graphs on your wall about what is your what's your target weight when the rams hit them at 19 months of age, and when do you think you can sort of most economically put that weight on and put those targets up on the wall and work through individuals, and actually, and the only way you can do that is through weighing stuff, or monitoring condition score. But definitely, yeah, I think growing sheep weights is the easiest thing to do and probably the fastest thing to do. So yeah, I think sort of monthly, 6 weekly weighing is going to be a feature of anyone really trying to optimise maiden performance.
Okay, the next little, what have we got? 25 minutes or whatever. There's a bit to come here, which I'm sure will be a refresher for most, if not all of you. Okay, so it's a little bit ad hoc, but hopefully there is something, some useful reminders about in there. And as I said, this is where we even have, if we start about during pregnancy, we even have less information on hobbits. So, but I've again made some extrapolations to what I think might happen. I guess this first one is really just comes back to joining duration. Very much a reminder that there is no need to go beyond 35 days. If you're in the breeding season. And even these graphs, I think these graphs were generated for 10 or maybe even 15 years ago, and they were based on 70% conceiving on the first cycle. So 100% of ewes would typically get mated on the first cycle, or very close to, but only 70% of them we assumed only 70% would get pregnant. Now we're seeing some numbers now of 80–85% getting pregnant on the first cycle. Okay, I don't know. I think Russ was on. I don't know if Russ has got any comments to add to that, but there's a number of people showing data where many more ewes are getting pregnant than on that first cycle than we first expected. So look, so therefore, I think it just reduces, increases the case for only having 2 cycles. They're going to be very, very few if you get 80 on the first, and then 80% of the remaining 20 on the second. Okay, there's going to be very, very few ewes that will conceive thereafter. So again, so short joinings, short lambings, just allowing for far more precision management, including managing of the weaners to get to their target weights. Preg scanning, we've said this before, 46% of producers might scan, but only half of them scan for multiples. It's no different in merinos versus maternals. I've given talk before, and the old maternal people will have a bit of a crack at the merino people, saying you're holding up the industry, but there's actually zero difference. So it's not as if all maternals people are doing it, no merino producers. So it's just such an important tool. If you've needed any evidence to say that it works, there's over 4,000 farmers who have done lifetime ewe management. We evaluated about 1,000 farmers over a decade that did that program, that did it between 2008 and 2018. And though the farmers that adopted pregnancy scanning for multiples and differential management improved weaning rates by 14%, which again I think it's a pretty strong case. Again, I mean, maybe I should to make it relevant to maidens. I think I've heard a lot of producers will just go wet dry on their maidens. Hopefully your reproductive potential is high enough to justify doing scanning for multiples as well. I just see there's just very little point in just pulling out your dries, or you're missing a big opportunity. What's next, Ferg? Condition. There's again a couple of slides here that many of you would have seen before. They're from the original work, the lifetime wool work, lifetime ewe management. Yep, this is a merino story. So this is the adult story, okay, that we know when we change ewe condition score at lambing, we logically change birth weights, okay, and about every 1 kilo So let's just assume for simplicity a condition score is 10 kilos. Okay, so if we change condition score by 1, okay, from 2.5 to 3.5, pretty big, I know. Birth weights would change by 400 to 600 grams. Okay, so that's the scale of the change in birth weights. It's the same in singles and twins. I guess when we did this work way back in 2001-2, we probably thought the twins might have been more sensitive, but that's not the case. Okay, and what I can add to this is the maiden story. They're how do I put it? They are also the response of maidens is the same. What I mean there is if I'd added, I should have, a maiden line onto this graph, it would just sit below these two lines here. Okay, so if we take the black line there, the single lambs out of an adult ewe, if I was to plot a maiden ewe on this graph, yeah, it would just run up there at about 0.3 of a kilo less, plus or minus a bit. Okay, maidens have smaller lambs, 0.3, 0.4, for two reasons. One is they are smaller at joining generally. Okay, that explains about half of it. And plus there is an inherent penalty because they are maiden and presumably still putting some nutrients into growth and so on. So we do see a lighter weights out of maidens, but their response to nutrition is actually the same as adults. And same as maternals. Had we put maternals on that graph, we've been finding recently that again they all respond. 10 kilos is 0.4, 0.5 the kilo or so in lamb birth weights. We roll to the next one. Lamb birth weight and survival, and again, this would be very, very familiar with this. This is the lifetime wool data, so merino specific. What we see we actually see the same response from the data we have, which is a pretty big data set. It was about 10,000 or something from the information nucleus block, the sheep CRC. So across 8 different sites around Australia. So over a bunch of years, so reasonably robust. The shape of the curve is actually the same for maidens, merino maidens. Again, it's just that maidens are lighter. Okay, so if you take in this graph here, I think singles were 5 kilos. Okay, up the top of the curve. Right, in a maiden, they might be 4.5 kilos. Okay, so still just on the cusp of the cliff. By contrast, you took twins in this data set out of an adult, they're about 4. Okay, and then you take half a kilo off that. In a maiden ewe, you're very much on the slippery part of the curve, and therefore logically, management of maidens and management of birth weight out of maidens is going to have a bigger effect on lamb survival because you're on the steep part of the curve. We go to the next one. I think it's the maternal story. So this is our more recent data. Ralph Barron out at DPI in Hamilton and Janelle Hocking-Edwards out at Struan out of South Australia. But yeah, big numbers in here, and the only difference here to what I just showed was that singles and twins in maternals essentially have the same survival. Okay, in the merino data, there was a penalty for being a twin. Okay, if you're both 4 kilos, there was the penalty because you're a twin. Okay, whereas with maternals, if singles and twins are both 4 kilos, the likelihood of survival is very much the same. Triplets are obviously lighter. And same story here. If this is for adults, the one in front of you now, maidens, we just shift everything to the left by that 0.4 of a kilo or so. So if we go to the next one, so this is complex, and this is predicted. This is what I think could happen. Okay, but we've got. So we'll go through. If we go through the adult story, that's real. Okay, so the black lines. Maybe it could be slightly different if anyone's done the lifetime ewe course before. might be slightly different to the graphs that you've seen there, because we've scaled this to a 60 kilo ewe rather than the 45 kilo ewes actually used in the research, and that was justified. We could do that from a statistical biological point of view, but we just focus on the adult singles. Again, you know, the message has always been pretty robust, hasn't it? Again, because you're at the top of that birth weight survival curve. You know, you've got to shift. You know, you've got to shift a fair way to the left in terms of birth weight to get them on the slippery part of the curve. So there's lots of, in terms of lamb survival at least, there's a fair bit of flexibility there in terms of how you manage, you know, your single merino ewes. Okay, yep. That in itself might suggest, you know, lambing at condition score 2, okay, or at least less than 2.5. That's not what we recommend. It's always been to have your singles around condition score 3, and that's because in a merino operation, it's more than just lamb survival. You know, we know that poor nutrition also compromises follicle development, lifetime reproduction of the progeny, and so on. Okay, if you look at the adult twins, I guess that's a slightly more, you know, or a steeper response. And I guess that just justifies the case again of preferentially feeding your twin-bearing merino ewes. And as we said, the targets for them should be, you know, 3.4 or thereabouts. Well, if we look at the yellow lines, and what I think would happen to a maiden, again, given the subject of this course, is I think they're just going to be far more sensitive. And that, you know, I think, you know, we know that fair idea again, that ewe lambs, you know, mate lambing for the first time at 12 months are going to be more sensitive to how we manage them through pregnancy. So I think it is logical on this occasion that you know, maidens are going to be sort of intermediate, let's say. So I think there's going to be a stronger case for both maiden twins, especially to manage them to hit these targets through pregnancy or by lambing. You know, at this point we can't say what they should be from an economics point of view, but so I think the safest option is to run with what we have for adults. You know, again around 3.4 or thereabouts for your maiden twins, and maybe back towards 3 for your maiden singles. But as I said, we don't have perfect information here, so there's a little bit of guesswork going on.
I guess, Tomo, those like to hit those targets, there's no way you can be just hitting you. Like you have to have good condition on those ewes early, because once they're late, like once they're mid-pregnancy and you're scanning them, it's all over pretty much, because you're not going to, a maiden ewe, you won't get that weight on.
Yep. What have we got next? Lifetime maternals. That I haven't shown the Hoggett response, or how to go at predicting the Hoggett response. Let's say there, the story with adults is reasonably similar with twins. Again, they are a bit more robust. I think with the merino story, we're talking about the slope of the line's about a 17% change in survival per condition score, whereas with maternals, it's about 11. So in other words, maternals are more robust, and because their lambs are bigger, okay? Right? So therefore, they're definitely at the top of that birth weight survival curve. But the story is essentially the same with maternal twins. Look after them, 3.4 thereabouts. The story is different with singles, okay? Whereas we saw an upward sloping line, a bit like the twins for merinos. What we found in the Lifetime Maternals project was definitely a case of overfeeding, or the potential to overfeed, okay? And singles fed towards 3.5, definitely seeing a depression in lamb survival. So, we probably don't need to complicate this one by going into what we might expect with Hoggets, but other than to conclude, in the absence of good data, maybe we can collect some during the course of this project. We've got to run at this stage with the same sort of targets in terms of condition score for maidens as we do for adults. So maybe that's a message. You know, maiden ewes scan with twins. You know, if they are less than 3.3, you know, sorry, less than 3, you know, they're definitely going to be a priority flock. You know, like other twin flocks, but you know, even more than other twin flocks. Okay, given they're more susceptible or more vulnerable to missing targets, and as Ferg said way back at the start, you know, carrying some of your best genetics and so on. Probably just a couple of, you know, not basics, but you know this, you know, story. It's all about the hierarchy and putting your most vulnerable flocks in your best paddocks, and you know, and that fits with ewe lambs and maidens and adults. And again, we hope to get a far better picture as we accumulate data on where hobbits sit or maidens sit, 19-month-old sit. Again, we hope to get a far better picture on how we do rank our different flocks. You know, where does a maiden twin sit versus a I don't know, adult single or whatever it might be, and how, you know, all our lambing paddocks aren't perfect, so where we do allocate them. You know, another part of that is we've been trying to get money as well. I mean, lambing density, many of you again be familiar with that and the work of Amy and others on smaller mobs, as she showed in a second. We're trying to, well, here it is. Okay, so maybe I'll go through that and then I can explain what we're trying to do. Again, I've had not had a crack. This is straight out of Amy's paper that she recently published. So basically looking at maternal adults and maternal maidens, and merino adults and merino maidens and their response to mob size. This data was from survey work, so it was, I guess it's not data that was collected in real time. She did have the subsequent work across 85 different sites across the country with adults only. But the survey work did include maidens, and what it concluded was that they responded the same. Their lamb survival was lower, for reasons I just explained. Their lambs are smaller and so on, but their response to the mob size itself was similar, and hence those lines are parallel. Okay, so I think, you know, as per the messages that Amy and others have been running around with for a little while now, you know, small is better. It sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but it's actually, there is no simple economic optimum. You know, it's influenced by many, many things. And so other than saying twins should be about half the size of singles, the mobs. So if you're prepared to go to smaller mobs, and you know, you should always try to land your twins in, you know, 40 to 50% of the size of the singles. But other than that, it's pretty hard to find sort of rules of thumb, you know, that you need to have 50 or you need to have 100, because so many factors influence that. Okay, you're starting, you know, the ratio of singles to twins, the current size of your paddock, the current stocking rates, your desired return on investment. So it's not straightforward. The good news is that we're trying to develop a tool. We haven't got the money for it yet, but we are trying to develop some more simple to use decision tools that would allow farmers to plug in their scenario and, you know, get a more informed decision on whether two things. Would it pay to split this paddock? Okay, you've got a paddock in front of you. You're contemplating whether it's worth putting a fence down the middle. Hopefully it would tell you whether that's a good decision or not. But coming back to that resource allocation and prioritising mobs, hopefully the next level of complexity would be which paddocks do I split? Okay, you know, you've got a whole bunch of lambing paddocks. You know, you might get a greater return from splitting, you know, certain paddocks and not others. So again, hopefully that too, without too much wishful thinking, will come along at some stage over the next couple of years. So I reckon that's almost about it. I think there's a couple here again. I think we can skip that last one. I mean, it's the same. It really comes back to that resource allocation or paddock selection. Shelter and so forth. Are as critical or more critical for maidens, one would think, than they are for adults. So I think that's enough. Go on and answer any questions or wherever you want to take it.
Thanks, Tomo, and happy to obviously take any questions that you're thinking about out there. I guess as you've probably gathered in the last hour or so, you've been listening to the person who knows as much about this as anybody on the planet. So lots of complexity, but I guess some things we know and some things that we can make good judgments on. But I think it highlights the importance of this project to me that we need to sort some of this out so we can come out with those guidelines that nail down exactly what our targets are. And I guess the beauty about everything that Tomo's ever done is it's always been modelled by Youngie before we recommend it, so that we know that it's not going to send you broke. It's always with the economics in mind, so that it's both a better outcome for productivity and welfare, but also a better outcome for profitability, which is obviously important. Any questions out there?
Yeah, Tom, I just got a question in regards to daylight length. If they're hitting their weight, does that negate the impact of daylight?
Did you get that, Ferg?
Yeah. So it's about short day length. So no, Steve, the overriding, like if you're joining in November, even if they're in good weight, you'll still get a depression due to day length. And so you always get at the same live weight, everything the same. The later you go up till the shortest day, the better they'll go. So the live weight won't overcome day length. And obviously at any joining point, it'll have its impact, but day length will override that or add to that. Does that answer your question, mate?
Yeah, that clarifies, because I was just thinking when you were showing like Perchinook and Cashmore that potentially those results, they probably join at different times as well. That has an influence on those layering percentages or scanning rates, but also just in general. That did negate some of the daylight lengths. So that's all good.
Yeah, so day length changes the response to condition score. So the higher so the response is phase shifts up, but it also they become more responsive. That's right, isn't it, Tomo?
Yeah. So basically, an extra condition. We spoke about that 2% earlier has been the average with adults. That's probably for a sort of a 1st of Feb joining. I'm going from memory here. A December joining, it's about 1%, and a March plus joining, it's about 3%. Okay, so not only do you go later, you get more, you also get more bang for your buck in some sense by better management, as in they're more responsive. As you progress into the season, they're more responsive to nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Thanks, sir.
And what level of marking percentages in maidens are we aiming for? Like best ever, of course, but like what's good now?
Good question, Jill. Maybe we could ask the group what we should aim for over the next couple of years. I think so. As Berg showed, that national average is about 15% behind your adults. Ferg, do you have a good handle on what the good people? Is it 5 to 10 behind?
Yeah, I think it's it's in that range. Like it's sort of 7 or 8 somewhere there. Yeah, I reckon 5 to 10 is probably a good. I think 5's is a nice stretch target. 10 we should be able to achieve somewhere. I think what have we got? I think we got people doing. Yeah, we're doing. 6 or 7 somewhere there is been done. So that should be a good target to have. So the gap. I don't think we're not going to get the same number, but if we can close it to a 5 to 10, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't know whether again it's something we'll decide on next week. But if we set up these sites the most logical target to change is joining weight. And if we want to try to put on an extra 3 to 5 kilos, let's say it was 5 kilos, there's 7.5%. So that halves the gap, doesn't it? Basically, yeah. So I think halving the gap is probably something that we're aiming for.
Yeah, it's probably.
But then hopefully we can do some other things during pregnancy as well, to ensure the lambs live.
Yeah. I'm just conscious we're sort of right on time, so I'll just talk about homework, and then we'll sit around and answer any questions that there are, or have a chat. But really keen for those that have attended today and those that are watching after today, when we'll get this recording out. For next week, we'll be keen to, between now and then, to calculate what your gap is currently. So we've got a bit of a benchmark across the group, and we'll do this for a lot of people. So that's working out number of lambs weaned per ewe mated in your maidens, and number of lambs weaned per ewe mated in your 3-year-olds and older. So that's one job. Second job is to document something that you've changed over the last, might be 10 years ago, might be this year, something that you changed around your maiden reproduction and it worked, and then something you changed and it either went the wrong way or it didn't change anything in your maiden. So if you have got those things, again, the stuff we're not interested in reinventing wheels. If there's stuff out there that's worked that isn't commonplace, then we would love to hear about them so we can see if it works in different scenarios. So that's your mission if you choose to accept it. Hopefully that's clear enough. And I'll just put so next week, we're going to go through a little bit of, mainly want to go through what are the things that we would like to try, really. What are the things that we should try? Hopefully from what you've come up with that night, but in the week, but also a few tips and tools around managing energy and protein in young sheep, containment feeding, just some light stuff. Throughout the course of the next 5 years, we'll do specific things, specific sort of anything you want specifically around extra knowledge, we're happy to bring to the table, and that'll be part of the project. So yeah, we'll be clarifying what we don't know and making a bit of a plan, and it's on the same time next week. But we're not going anywhere. There are details if you want to get in touch, but we'll sit here and have chat, answer questions, and